Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today is book review time. I'm going to be talking about The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. The Black Coast is book one in the God-King Chronicles by author Mike Brooks. It's his first fantasy novel. He is an established author. He normally writes for the Black Library, I think it's called, which is essentially an imprint or a publisher, I guess, in its own right, publishing books set in the Warhammer universe. So although this is labelled as his fantasy debut, it's not his actual debut as an author in his own right. This is one that I've been wanting to read for a long time, and my wife bought me this gorgeous copy for my birthday in June last year, so it's been sitting on my shelf unread for quite a while. I eventually got round to it in April 2022 and I'm really pleased that I did, because I had a great time reading this one. First of all, and as a kind of unusual place to start one of my reviews, I'm going to read out the dedication for this book. It's a bit of an unusual one in itself, and I actually really liked it. I read it to my wife this morning actually, and she said it was really sweet. And it's a bit odd maybe, but I found myself agreeing with her. So the dedication itself reads, "I don't know exactly who this book is for, but whoever it is, I hope they find it." And as you can see, I definitely have found it, and I'm glad that I did so. On the back of the book we have three main headlines. We have War Dragons, Fearsome Raiders and a Demonic Warlord on the rise, and that's a really intriguing trio of selling points for me. The synopsis itself does talk about war, but it also talks about raiders looking for a place to settle, while knights saddle their war dragons ready to defend their land. So although it does kind of say that the raiders haven't come to pillage, and it talks about this new mismatched society, I wouldn't have known that that would be the focus of the book if it wasn't for things that have been said by other reviewers. I was initially expecting a book all about war, about dragon riders and about raiders and about the two different groups facing off against each other in a battle of attrition. That's not what we got here, and I'm actually really pleased with the path that this book took, because any fantasy book that you read will probably have those aspects in it, and this is a bit of a departure from that, and I really think it worked very, very well. So instead what we get here is the story of two very different cultures coming together and learning to live with each other. So you've got language barriers and you've got very big cultural differences, and you've got the two groups who are trying to come to terms with how different they are, but also to not necessarily overcome those differences, but to kind of make allowances so that they can actually live together in harmony. So this actually gives a really interesting story for me, because these two different peoples, they've been at war for generations. The raiders will generally tend to raid on an annual basis, although they haven't done so for a number of years, and that's because there's a new leader who has taken over and she sees things very differently. She's got a different path in mind for her people, and in their homeland that's where you've got this demonic warlord on the rise. So they've basically come over to this Black Coast as a means of escaping, and they want to build a new home for themselves. So because of the background between these two people, there's a lot of distrust, there's quite a bit of anger, and there's a little bit of betrayal as well. And for me, it made for a really compelling story, especially at the start when you've got this party of raiders who are basically raiding. To all intents and purposes, it looks like an absolutely massive raiding party, much bigger than any previously experienced. And then when the raiders land, they've got to try and persuade these people that they are not here to wage war. They want to find themselves somewhere to live, and they want to be at peace with their old enemies. So it's really interesting the way that this story starts with something that could be the spark of a really terrible war, and how some of our characters do whatever they can to avoid that war. So the characters themselves I found really interesting, but there were two in particular, one on each side, who were really the ones at the forefront of trying to make this new arrangement work. And as our main characters, I really liked them. I was really invested in them, and more than anything I found that these two characters were elevated by their interactions with each other. So that was a really well worked part of the story for me. I really liked the depth that you got to these two characters and the way that you could really see what was driving their thought processes. The other characters around them were also nicely rounded, and even if nothing much was to really happen in this story, I could quite happily read about these two different cultures coming together, learning each other's languages, trying to get through those cultural and language barriers, and becoming a new society together. It was just all very well written, all very well put together, and some of the little things that did happen whilst all this was going on really showed for me that this is a book that's been thought out in some quite minute detail. Now, although this is the main draw of the book, there are also two other storylines that are kind of hidden away within this, and for me, both of those are more focused on the second and potentially third book in this series, and that also shows that the planning that's been done here is very well done. It really gives me the impression that the whole trilogy was planned out in advance before this first book was written. Now, for me, as a complete estimate, I would say that this one storyline of the two different cultures coming together is maybe 80% of the book, and then you've got another storyline which is perhaps 15%, and then a third which is 5%. And although that seems maybe not very well balanced, I thought that it actually worked very well. Those two smaller storylines were well enough integrated here, because it seemed to me that I had all of my focus on one place, but I still had an awareness of things that were happening around me, rather than having my focus completely split into three and maybe not getting as much as I did from what I saw as the main storyline. Now, both of those additional storylines did feel that they were building a nice kind of solid groundwork for events that will happen later on in the series, and I appreciated that because I thought that they worked well, they integrated well with the story of the Black Coast, rather than feeling like they were just tagged on at the end almost as an afterthought. So the world building here I thought was pretty good. I like how, even though most of the storyline is focused on a comparatively small piece of land within this world, we do get to see various other bits of the world in these other two storylines. Now, I'm not going to go into what those other two storylines are, because I feel, especially with the way that they are set to introduce, I think, elements from the second and third book, I won't go into them for spoiler purposes, but they did hold their own in this story, and I did like the way that they allowed us to see a few different parts of the world and also introduce a few different characters whilst they were doing so. For the main story, we did learn quite a bit about the customs of these two different peoples, the Raiders and the people of the Black Keep, and I like how we got to see a little bit of a lore between those two different cultures as well, but none of it felt that it was really being thrown at me. We do also get to see, of course, these war dragons, and they're not your normal dragons that you tend to see in fantasy, so these are wingless beasts. So you have these massive muscular beasts lumbering through the forest at actually quite a great speed, rather than what your, I guess, normal perception might be, which would be dragon riders attacking from the air. So that was quite interesting to see, although I didn't feel that we saw enough of the dragons. Maybe they didn't play actually that big a part in the story. They were just there as almost a little piece of the background, but then they did come out on a couple of occasions when there were battles to be fought. One of the things that really stands out about the world building here is actually a linguistic feature, and it's with regards to the Nereidans, who are the dragon riders of our two cultures, and they don't have what I would call a kind of normal linguistic concept of the word I for self. And that's really interesting, because what they do instead is they refer to themselves essentially in the third person. They will refer to themselves as this man or this woman, this lord, and so forth. And the choice of reference used there is very important in terms of the social standing of the person who is speaking, and also in terms of how they wish to portray themselves in the context of what they're saying. So it does give additional kind of weight to the wording if, for instance, a lord who will normally go around referring to himself as this lord will suddenly say this man instead. It adds that extra kind of gravitas to what is being said and to how he feels about those words and to the person or persons he's saying them to. So it is a little bit different, but I didn't feel it to be intrusive. I know there are a few people who have read this book and I've spoken to about it who found this really strange and couldn't really get over it. But for me, it's just one of those things that you do tend to find in fantasy stories where you have a different language essentially, and you're reading it in your native language because that's the language that the story is written or translated to. But you will find these little mannerisms of speech which are just unusual in terms of what we will generally tend to use in our own everyday lives. So it's not something that's like a deal breaker or anything along those lines. It's just a little bit different, but it was very easy for me to get past this, and it almost became natural, especially when I started to pick up some of those different references that one particular person would use to really give a different meaning to the words being said. Probably the one thing that I did struggle with a little bit linguistically was actually with regards to a couple of the character names, which I thought were a little bit too similar. I listened to the audiobook of this actually, and the narration, by the way, was really top notch, but there were just two names that were a little bit too similar, and occasionally I was thrown by this. So the leader of the raiding party is Sana Satistuta, and that's spelled Saana, and her daughter is spelled Zhanna. And if I was reading it, I would probably pronounce that as Jana or maybe Zana with a short A. But in the audiobook, if I can get this right, she was Zana Stuta, so Sana's daughter. And it was just a little bit too confusing at times having Sana and Zana, and occasionally not really being able to distinguish between the two of them. Whereas in print, the difference is quite obvious. Overall though, I really enjoyed The Black Coast. I'm really looking forward to continuing the story with the Splinter King, which is book 2, and then book 3 is the Godbreaker, I think it's called, and that one's scheduled for release in June 2022. So this is a series that I have the opportunity to finish this year, and ideally that's what I'd like to see myself doing. As far as book 1 goes though, The Black Coast, I gave it 4.5 stars because overall it was a really enjoyable read, a very interesting story, different to what I might have expected, different to what I would see in what I would call similar stories. And also I felt that the writing was actually quite brave in the linguistic choices that I've just mentioned, where some people would really be put off with that, and I have heard of people putting this book down, DNFing it, because they couldn't get over that one little hurdle. So on to my weighted ratings for this book then, and we'll start off as usual with the enjoyment, and for this I gave 17 out of 20 because overall it was a really good story, a really different one that I had a good time reading. The world building I gave 18 actually, because I really liked the thought that had been put into this, and the way that even though we were just focusing, as I said earlier, on the one quite small piece of this world, we did still get to see a lot more of it in those little snippets of story that were said elsewhere. I liked the lore here, I liked the dragons in it and the way that they were quite different as well. I liked the language choices and the way that that was definitely different. So there's a lot going for this book in terms of the world building, and I definitely appreciated it. The characters I gave 17 out of 20. The main characters that I've already spoken about, as I said, really worked well together and kind of elevated each other because of those interactions that they had. I did like as well the side characters around them, and also the characters that we had in these two additional storylines were really good as well. So the overall character work was really well done. The main part being these two cultures coming together, I think that allowed us to delve into the characters a little bit more because we were really getting an introduction to them and to the way that they think and the way that they view different people, and I really appreciated that. For the plot, I also gave 17 out of 20. The main kind of storyline, I guess, is something that I think is going to be encompassing the 3 books that make up this trilogy when it is completed. So we only see a small portion of that, and as I say, we primarily focus on just this one aspect in the Black Coast, but I really liked it. I liked the little things that we had there rather than it being these really big earth-shattering events. Now, they are probably what you would describe as earth-shattering to these two peoples, or especially the people of the Black Keep at least. The raiders, though, have also left their homeland. They've left everything they know behind, so for both of those, they are really big events. For us as readers, I don't feel that they are sort of massively high stakes, but it is so engrossing despite that. And then you've got these other snippets, you can see these other things that are happening in the background in different parts of the world as well, and you can also see how they're going to have an impact on our main storyline from this first book. The writing style I've given 7 out of 10. I didn't really have any issues with it once I'd got past those linguistic choices that were just a little bit different to what I'm used to, so everything was really nicely done there. The pacing I've given 3 out of 5. I didn't really have an issue with the pacing. I thought for the book itself It was well paced. I would have maybe been expecting something a little bit quicker, but actually the pacing that we did have here, I think really suited the story that was being told. For the discretionary section then, I've given 2 out of 5 because I really do like this cover. The UK cover that I have is a really nice one, even though it doesn't really tell us too much, it doesn't show too much, but I do like the colours on there and this kind of mountain that's being hit by the sunlight there, and also the text I think just works really nicely. I think the overall composition and just the way it looks is really nice. There is also a nice map inside, and I do like a map with my fantasy story. This one doesn't really show too much, it's more the actual coastline itself, and then you've got quite a lot of it is made up of open water before we see the islands that our raiders have come from. So that's natural, and it's just a way of being able to show both of those parts of the world in the one map, and you don't need to see the rest of it because it's not actually important to the story. So overall then, that gives the Black Coast 81%, which is a really good score and does reflect the 4.5 stars that I gave this book out of 5. It puts it in equal 21st place, and there are currently 7 other books sharing 21st on my Hall of Fame. So for whatever reason, it seems to be a popular score, but 81% is really, really good. So there we go, that's The Black Coast by Mike Brooks, book 1 in the God-King Chronicles. Definitely recommend this one if you haven't picked it up, if you're interested in dragons, if you're looking for something that's maybe just a little bit different. This is potentially a really good book for you to try. If you've read this one, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. If you haven't, let me know if I've put it on your radar. As with any video, if you've liked what you've heard today, give this one a like, hit subscribe if you haven't already. You can find all my usual links in the description box below the video to all my social media and support the channel pages, including my Discord community and my Patreon. That's it for today though, thank you very much for joining me. I hope to see you again in the next video soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.